Hello, and welcome to Handing It the Jesus podcast. This is the podcast where you learn to trade your deepest struggles to God for peace. And the question that we're going to answer today, or we're going to start to work on, right, is what is the biggest struggles that you're experiencing that are causing distance between you and Jesus right now? This may be an action that you're doing, a thought process, belief, or a question that you're experiencing. And this so happens to be the first question in our workbook.
Yeah.
So Matt and I are going to start to talk about that.
Already it's a pretty hard question, right? Because we're asking you to think about where do you feel distance, and to think a little bit deeper about not just some casual Christianese sin that maybe we often talk about in church or small group, or that we can willingly even offer with a group of people of, oh yeah, here's what I struggle with, or oh yeah, I know this is bad, but I do it anyway. But where do you really feel like if this were not a problem or in your life, that you would have so much more intimacy, so much more peace in your life, so much more connection with Jesus?
Right.
And I think this is a hard question, and you might find that down the road we might need to tweak this answer, because as we start narrowing in our focus and talking more distinctly about really the rift between you getting closer in your walk with the Lord, that really it's a different issue. Right. And it's okay to come back to this question, I think.
Yeah, or they're like supports to like this problem, right? There are pillars that build upon it.
Yeah.
So like what we're wanting to do for this is like, as you're in the discern section, the very first section, and you get to this very first subsection, the problem, we're just trying to, in your own understanding right now, define that problem as you see it. Now, if you're coming to the workbook, you're coming to this podcast, you probably have an idea of some of the problems that you face. And one of the recommendations that I would have is go after the biggest problem. I think that sometimes people are like, okay, well, hey, you know what? Let's go after some of the smaller problems. We could build up momentum to the bigger problem. When you're dealing with intimacy, you don't, and you're trying to get close, you don't want to deal with the small problems. You don't want to take small steps. You want to try to take the biggest step that you can in a certain area, right? If I'm having challenges with my wife and the elephant in the room is that we can't talk about our finances, I don't want to start taking her on dates all the time. I don't want to start talking to her in a very romantic way or about logistics or different things. We want to try to work on the elephant in the room so that the other things come more naturally. And that's really what we're wanting to do with this problem, is define it as you understand it so far. And like Matt said, as we go through the other sections, we're going to, the section to discern, right? We're going to try to have some type of discernment using God to guide us, to try to narrow down the focus and really pin down what is the thing that we really need to work on the most? What is the thing that's holding us back the most?
Mm-hmm. Do you think it would be helpful for everyone listening to this to think through multiple things at first so that we can narrow it down later?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly what I did whenever I was going through this. So I would encourage that. I think that's
helpful.
Whenever I started this and I answered the question, I put down, I think, 3 things. So, and I'll just kind of tell you what are those 3 things for me. So in the problem, I said I struggle to be a joyful giver.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is like I struggle to not like live in fantasy land, right? And I think the other one you and I can kind of relate to. I struggle to keep my eyes on God, or I struggle to like sit there in my own personal time and actually devote that to pursuing God rather than pursuing other things like TV shows or whatever entertainment may come along.
Yeah.
So like as I look at those 3, and you'd get this in the narrowing your focus section, right? But you can most certainly start that here, and if you want to, you can read ahead to the narrowing focus. It's not very far in the workbook, and you can read through that. But what we want to do is when we look at the problem, which one has the biggest punch? When you read it, which one's a little bit harder to read? When you read it, which one makes your gut turn a little more? Which one causes a
Mm-hmm.
little more tension or a little more distress when you look at it, or causes you a little bit of hesitation? It's kind of like if you're doing a chore around your home and you're like, all right, which one is the hardest? The dishes are piling up, the floor needs to be vacuumed, and I need to do laundry. Which one do I want to do the least? That's kind of like in this moment, whichever one of those we're shying away from the most is the
Yeah.
one we want to press into.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. For me, if I can share some of the main issues or problems that I initially had a gut reaction to, or just a general thought, and then my gut reaction to, um, that I thought my problems might lie with laziness, not wanting to worry about getting important things done. My problems with lust, ever since I was a little kid, struggling with this, and my addiction to entertainment, needing to keep my mind occupied with things that really don't matter as much. And I'm not just talking about doing restful things. I'm talking about
Right.
living in that fantasy land, keeping my mind distracted and my heart distracted. Whether it's any type of media or watching a show, reading a book, scrolling through my phone, just not being present in the world that I'm in. And I think the one that for me was the biggest gut punch. And all of these have been gut punches throughout my life. But I'm talking about right now in my life.
Right now.
Where do I feel like I am distant from the Lord? And that this thing, if I can get a little deeper into what's underneath it, is actually keeping me from running to Jesus.
Right.
And for me, I would say that is this addiction to entertainment, needing to keep my mind occupied with things that don't matter. Now,
And it's so easy.
other parts of my life, it has been lust. It has been issues with looking at women and seeing them as objects, or looking at pornography, right? And I've dealt with that in different ways throughout my life. And at different times also, it's been an issue with laziness and not wanting to worry about real practical things that need to get done in my life. And so procrastinating things and then getting piled underneath loads of different work-related things to press my life forward, and then feeling anxiety or depression over those things. But, I've worked through some of that. Now, all of these things are still circulating in my life because I'm not perfect. But right now, where I feel like I need to press into and figure out what's underneath it, why does it keep me from moving towards Jesus? It's wanting to live in fantasy land. It's wanting to keep my mind occupied and engaged all of the time. And that keeps me from thinking on what Jesus wants for my life. That keeps me from thinking on, well, how do I engage with my children really well in this moment, or be present with my wife in this moment? So it's not just intimacy with Jesus that it hurts. I think it's intimacy with many other people in my life, with my family, with friends. It's intimacy with better understanding and knowing myself, because I'm not giving myself a lot of time to process what I'm feeling whenever I'm keeping myself entertained. So for me, I feel like that is the one at this point in my life that I need to do business with.
Right.
And it's hard to even talk about right now. It feels like, oh man, as a counselor and a Christian who's been following Jesus since I was 9 years old, has heard the gospel thousands and thousands of times, I should have more self-discipline. I should be able to turn my phone off easily, or realize when I'm doing the doom scrolling, right? Or put the book down, or just stay focused on who's in front of me. And sure, whenever I'm at work, I can do that just fine, because that's where my mind's engaged at, right? But when I go home, when I transition into real life, it is so incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to appreciate you talking about it. And it's as we're actually talking about this right now, and you said even just vocalizing it, you could start to feel
Sure.
that this doesn't even feel comfortable talking about. That's how we know this is the right one.
Yeah.
And as you heard Matt start to talk about this problem, you could probably detect the different layers. And if you're a human being, you can probably see in your own problem, your own understanding, there's going to be different layers, right? So like even as I start to focus on my problem, right, the struggle to be a joyful giver was the biggest hit for me. Now, sin is layered and layered and layered. And sin, to put simply for this, is something that you do that distances yourself from God. And we even had that in the question a little bit, like what's the biggest struggle you're experiencing that's causing distance between you and Jesus right now? So one of the things is, since this is a multi-layered thing, you're going to look at something and one part of your life may manifest in that distancing act differently than another one. And it may be different than it is right now. So yeah, I think that as you're searching this and you're finding your own question, that's going to be completely normal. And something that you're probably going to notice as you're thinking about this, even before you get to the other sections, which are actually going to adjust and start to talk about more of the depth of this problem, and trying to kind of figure out the different pieces and where we need to do the work on these things. As you're coming up with the problem, it's okay to take a considerable amount of time to think about it right now and to try to get an idea of the biggest part, because you're deciding, all right, where am I going to start this journey? This is going to be the starting place. And if you decided to start somewhere else, like let's say that Matt was in here right now, or, actually I'll use myself as an example, right? So like to be a joyful giver. But let's say that right now I was actually in a different place. And the biggest struggle for me was that I have a porn addiction, and it's causing me to spend ample amount of time looking at porn, masturbating every day. If I'm doing that right now, that may be the biggest distancing event right now. But then I may be like, okay, I'm convicted enough and I'm going to change this. But instead, now I'm just consuming other types of media. Or instead, now I've found a hobby that I become obsessed with. And it doesn't.
And you're just trading one thing for another, right?
Yes.
But there's an issue that's underneath that lust or that porn addiction, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like whenever we're talking about this problem, it's okay that you may be looking at a certain part of this problem, because at the end of this process that we're working through in this, we're hoping that it's going to still get at the underlying issue, and that we're going to be able to take that and turn it to God.
100%. I would say that when we're saying, if you're listing multiple problems that you see in your life, and we're asking you to notice which one has the biggest gut punch, I think it's okay to pause for a second after listing or writing down some of those, and to say, well, by a gut punch, I mean what's happening in your body. Right? Can you feel something happening in your body? Maybe it's not in your gut. Maybe it's in your chest that's tightening up, or your shoulders. For me, when I start to feel anxiety about something and I'm not even sure I can name what I'm feeling, I clench my jaw. My jaw gets so tight, and I don't realize it until I notice at some point, why does my jaw hurt?
Yeah.
Or
maybe your thoughts start racing, or
or my heart's racing, or something's happening in my body, right? What is happening in your body as you go through each of these problems in your life?
Yeah.
And I think that you'll find where you have the biggest proverbial gut punch, is that this thing doesn't cause me to run to Jesus. I'm running away from Jesus.
Yes.
So when I have struggled with lust in my life, or pornography, or I've struggled with laziness in my life, even though those things at some point in my life have caused me to run away from Jesus, when I started doing business with those things, and now when I start to feel those things come back, if I struggle, because guys, we're always going to be tempted.
Yes.
Now when I experience those things, I try to run to Jesus with those things. But where do you experience a problem that you are allowing to keep you from going to Jesus?
Yes.
And I think that's where we might find where our problem is.
Yeah.
Does that sound right to you, Craig?
Absolutely. And the thing is that the distance that we're talking about, so there is going to be an urge here to make this simple, which is okay, right? If you do that during this section, we're actually going to narrow it down in other sections that we'll talk about in other episodes. But for this one right here, if you feel like you want to throw something generic out there, I had a huge desire to throw something like pride out there. as kind of like a generic umbrella, that's okay, right? I would have been able to work my way through to like get to the biggest gut punch or the biggest issue with my heart there that I need to start praying about and hand over to Jesus and actually like converting to some type of action. So it's okay if you look at this and you're like, oh, well, like Matt and Craig, they kind of have a different answer than me, or they're a little more specific. That's okay. We've been thinking about this and pondering on this a while, and you may have too, right? So you may have like one of the 7 deadly sins or something like that as a generic thing. You may have something really specific. That's totally okay. All that's okay. That's why we have that idea that like this can be an action that you're doing. It can be a thought process, a belief. It can be a question that you're experiencing. The truth is, something that you do may actually dip a little bit into all of those, and that's completely fine. So it just matters like where is the orientation that you have when you're thinking about this this problem conceptually. We'll take that and then we'll build on it as we continue to go through this process. So that's all that you're doing in this problem section. I think that one of the things that you may decide to do as well is that as you go through this, you may decide, like Matt said, you may decide to come back to the problem and be like, you know what I thought was kind of a big issue wasn't actually the biggest issue. I kind of lowballed myself there.
Right.
Or, that's fine if you want to come back and do this. You're not going to ruin your whole life. If you decide that, you want to go for an easier one, that's okay. That's okay, right? This is hard handing these things over. We've been so used to living our life doing what's right in our own eyes that there's sometimes in discernment, we think that we have an idea of what it is that we do. Then as we talk with God, as we go through it, as we work through it, we start to realize that, hey, our view on things isn't quite right. So that's okay. And I want to encourage you that if that happens for you, totally okay. There's nothing wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you did the process wrong. In fact, it actually means that we're getting a little more specific to what we want to do there.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a psalm that I really love that I think would be appropriate to share at this point when we're trying to discern what is it that I'm struggling with, and what really keeps me from the Lord. And sometimes it's hard to discern, guys. It's hard to really know our heart because we are fickle human beings and we don't have full awareness or perception or understanding or knowledge. We have to lean on others to maybe point things out to us. And I think we have to rely on God to work on our hearts, to even open up to Him. Hey, if this really is an issue, please reveal it to me, God. Give me some kind of understanding around this. And I see evidence for this all over Scripture, but one of my favorites is in Psalm 139 and verse 23. It says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." This is a passage that starts with God knowing us from the womb, that He knows the hairs on our head, that He's with us wherever we're at. And the psalmist, David, is asking, know my heart and reveal it to me. Show me where I have grievances. Show me where my heart is not aligned with you, God. And I think we often need a supernatural help sometimes to know this problem. So if you're struggling to figure out what this problem and what's underneath it, but first just generally what this problem is, man, I would encourage you to go to God in prayer and pray this psalm. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Help me to understand it. Because if we can keep praying that prayer the rest of our lives, I think that we'll be able to do this process well to get to the root of what is really keeping us from the Lord. And we need help. That's why we're trying to do this podcast with you guys, and we encourage you to reach out for help to others as well. You can send us an email. We'd love to communicate with you. Reach out to somebody in your life that you trust. We'll talk about relationships way down the road, but there's something that we value. It's why Craig and I wanted to do this podcast together.
Absolutely.
Because to talk about something like this by ourselves, I don't think it's feasible.
Gets you in pretty dangerous territory.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us for this episode, and just starting to answer that first question, like the problem. I think what Matt said is wonderful. I would start this with a prayer, right? And all right, God, like help me help lead me to the problem that I want to work on that's going to close that distance between us the most. And say that in whatever words, or actually like praying the psalm, and being able to open yourself up to that and allowing yourself time to think about it. It's okay. You don't have to jump at the first thought that goes into your mind. But the next episode that we do, we're actually going to go on narrowing your focus. So we're going to take this and we're going to break it down a little bit, or if you have multiple questions, right, and we'll talk through that. And we'll continue to move through the process in the workbook. If you're looking for the workbook, we'll have a link in the show notes so that you guys will be able to go and download that. And, it's free, so you guys will be able to go through that. And, if you enjoy the workbook, if you enjoyed this podcast and you find it helpful, we plan on producing other digital content that will hopefully be very helpful and supplement this and expand upon different things. So please, if you find this helpful, we also have a link in the show notes to donate to our nonprofit here, Handing It to Jesus, so that we can continue the work that we're doing. But until next time that we get the opportunity to talk to you, we wish you well in this process and your ultimate goal of handing it to Jesus.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Take care. Hey, guys. Thank you for tuning in and giving us a listen today to this episode of Handing It to Jesus. We are a not-for-profit organization, and we depend on the donations of people like yourself so that we can keep making podcast episodes like this, and so that we can continue making written content. And so we have provided for you a free workbook that you can find linked right below. You can also find linked our donation page right below. You can also find those links in our bio as well. We hope that through those donations that we are able to continue making more episodes, that we're able to continue making more written content so that you can hopefully grow closer in your walk with the Lord. We ask that you prayerfully consider partnering with us in that way if God lays that on your heart.
Yeah, and a little more about that. I mean, this is something that I personally struggle with financially, in this like scarcity mindset that Jesus has been working on with me for quite some time. And maybe you're a person like me that's been suffering in that way, and where I see different things that I want, and it always seems like money is tight. And one of the things I want to let you know is that part of our walk with Jesus is that Jesus gets us uncomfortable around those things. And so like usually what this looks like for me is I have my eye on something new that I want. And then there's a effort, there is a mission, there is a front on the kingdom's effort, or something that somebody's doing that I want to put towards. And then I have that like little competition that ends up happening. It's like, all right, do I want to invest towards the kingdom, or do I want to go towards this product? And that's super common for Christians to, especially like in our society in today's day and age, to compete with. And so if you're hearing this today and maybe you feel led to give, maybe there's a movement in your heart, like Matt says, pray about that, take that to God and act on it immediately. Immediately go to the donation, and whatever God lays on your heart, allow yourself to do that, because maybe God is actually calling you to move forward on this front, to actually give into this battle, this mission that we have here. And if you don't feel that call, that's okay too. You can still enjoy the content. Others may pave the way for you. There are most certainly times in my life where things that I really enjoy and that really help me, that others have paved the way for me. And that's okay. You can still enjoy the content, and God may wrestle with you or may call you to fight on this front in a different way, or give in a different way to somebody else. Or maybe, like Matt said, it's actually just spreading the word. It's maybe telling somebody about our podcast. Maybe it's giving us a review in some way to be able to help other believers find this. There's so much content in the world and so many different things that maybe we consume maybe a little too much, and we just want to provide another avenue for believers to put the focus on Jesus, put the focus on that relationship, and to be able to spend that time, whether or not it's in the podcast or some of the written content we have, or some of the even ideas that we have for the future. So thank you for joining us in that, whether or not it's you donating to us right now, or whether it's you just letting other people know about us existing.
Right. Yeah, thank you guys again for tuning in. Please subscribe, like, follow, share with your friends, talk about us with other people. We would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much again, and we love you. We will see you next time.